but there are more Republicans for selectmen and mayors than there are Democrats, because locally, people like a conservative approach to finances. There are the realities of politics that I have seen. I haven't participated in it because maybe I'm fortunate. I own my own business. If I don't get reelected, I just have more spare time. You know, so it's not like I need this job. But if it's your livelihood, and you know that you throw your legislator under the bus when things like steep grants come up, maybe they turn a blind eye. I mean, you know, there's that whole quid pro quo that goes on. You can't say that it doesn't happen. You would like to think in a perfect world that we can all just debate our ideas, but there are pressures. Something that I found remarkable is Senator Prey sent out an email to all the municipal leaders saying, what can we do in the legislature to help you? And it was a shout, an email shout back at her that came from all over the state. Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, Connecticut Organization of Small Towns have been putting the exact same agenda in front of the legislature for years. Stop the unfunded mandates. Stop dumping your problems down on us. Stop the forced regionalization. And they never hear it. And now she's asking, and basically what they said is, here's the thing you've been seeing for the last 5 years. I mean, honestly, I hope, regardless of party, I hope that the legislature does turn over quite a bit. It's up to us to do that, though.
As a small businessman, I don't know, do you employ folks?
I had employed 17, now I employ about 7.
And then you are aware that the unemployment fund went bankrupt back in October of 2007, and the legislature did nothing. Except borrow close to $1 billion. Come January 1st, I'm anticipating that 1 or 2 people will still be unemployed in the state.
I expect.
And they're going to be looking for an unemployment check, and there's no money. The legislature and the new administration will have, in my opinion, and there are plenty who will disagree with it and have, that they'll have no choice but to borrow more money in order to make those payments and then turn around and increase the unemployment tax of every employer in the state, because if they don't, the feds will come in and they'll make it even higher.
Right.
How are we going to create jobs when that's the first course of action, Mr. Governor?
Well, that is the death spiral that we're looking at, and that when it gets beyond just the regulatory discomfort that the state causes business, there are the practical. I've seen, I think, it's up 2% so far for my work, my unemployment insurance. We don't have to go out and borrow if we set our priorities to say we only have so much in the way of financial resources, even with all of the taxation that I've spoken about. And that these are policies, if we're going to talk about being business friendly doesn't mean throwing employee rights and environmental protections out the door, but it means being more effective as a government. If we only have this much, here are some of the priorities. Workers' comp rulings in the state, we have to reform how we handle workers' comp. We also have to fund unemployment appropriately, with the understanding it's going to take a while to get out of this, but that's going to make this a short-term priority, and there are going to be some other things that are going to be priorities for others that are going to fall off the table. I can't see borrowing money to do it, because that will just exacerbate the death spiral.
But Governor Marsh, when you take office on January 5th, besides the fact that in 30 days you have to deal with a $3.5 billion budget deficit, you got this other little problem off budget that needs to be dealt with. And there's a $1 billion debt to the federal government and no money to make those payments. What are you going to do?
I think we're going to have to find it, at least the majority of it, from within, and maybe work with our federal legislators to give us some relief. Because there's an awful lot of money coming out of our pockets that is going to the federal government that we're not seeing a return on. And that's, I think, a dysfunction of our executive office. We have, across the board, failures on dealing with our federal representatives and bringing resources and assistance back to the state. We have, you know, a solid block of Democrats right now with a Democratic administration, and we're getting nowhere. To me, that's because our Republican executive office has no focus, has no mission, has no clear objective that can be sent out to the departments and say, this is where we need some help. I think if we're looking at a jobs growth program here in Connecticut, building on what we already have, our workforce, our location to major urban centers, that we can put together a competent plan that says we need some help here. And we're not going to be the only state doing that. And I think that's part of what the federal guys are going to have to look at is we cannot continue this 99 weeks of unemployment without seeing that somebody's got to pay for that. And if they're going to be instituting measures like that, we're going to have to expect that there's going to be some help. And they can print their own money. We can't here in Connecticut.
You already conceded that you don't believe that the $3.5 billion can be solve strictly through budget cuts, ballpark, how much can you cut before you have to look at the option of raising taxes?
I think realistically, we have to look at about a 50-50 split, so 1.5, 1.7 billion coming from reductions in cost.
You got any idea where you can get those reductions in cost?
I think we're going to take a couple of objectives. First, we start with the reality of how much money we can expect to get in, and I know how hard that is with the smoke and mirrors numbers that are out there. But secondly, and I think this is again where I'm different from my other two opponents, we're going to focus on what the state needs to do. And the executive management team is going to put together those priorities. Once those priorities are set, we're going to organize government to meet those priorities, not to meet the silos of boards and commissions that are out there. I'm not going to come out and say this commission or that department or this agency is going to go, because I think that distracts from the overall debate of what do we want to accomplish, and they start being territorial and saying why I'm the one. If you want to educate a child, well, then we're going to educate a child. We're going to understand in urban issues that there's health concerns, that there are domestic concerns, certainly education concerns, that all affect whether a child can learn. Let's put the best plan forward to educate that child, and the agencies that we need to meet it will identify those. And then secondly, what's happened across really all disciplines is when there have been freezes or reductions in spending, it's been across the board. There's been no allocation based on performance, or there have been self-evaluations, and surprisingly enough, everybody does a really good job. I think if we start focusing on outcomes, and this can be done in a legislative session, and not just reduce the number of employees or reduce the number of commissions, but start focusing on the outcomes, and used David Osborne, somebody the governor brought in a while back, using charter agencies to start moving that forward. I think we can drive some pretty significant reductions in a very short time. There's going to be some learning curves and some pain associated with that. But I think that's where we have an opportunity here. With everybody's back against the wall, you can only go so far in saying, I'm not willing to change. Once you hit that point, the executive office does have some hammers, whether it's layoffs, vetoes, and certainly the ability to not appoint commissioners and their underlings, so that we're reducing cost at the top to start with and really setting an example for the rank and file down the way.
Let me give you an example. The Board of Trustees of the State University System voted last week to freeze tuition and fees for students, which we publicly think is a very good thing for them to do. But it comes with a little caveat. They'll do that provided they're not asked to take severe budget cuts when trying to address the 3.5. That blackmail?
Yeah. And
how would you deal with that?
Well, I found that, this whole debate, I think again, it doesn't focus on really what our outcome to be is. I was up at UConn last week doing an interview with the radio station up there, and the notion of tuition freezes was important. First of all, I think UConn and the State University and the community college system offer a pretty good value. I don't think they're overpriced. But if we're going to talk about creating jobs in the state and keeping our young people here, I think we do have to make it a high priority that you can get a quality education. That doesn't mean you have to go to the main campus or the state schools. Maybe it means you start in the community college system and you work your way up, but you get a quality education. What I thought was particular about that, when the students are saying, we want our tuitions frozen, well, there's a lot that goes into that. Then you go to every one of your professors and say that please agree to a wage freeze because we don't want to pay any more for our education. Go to some of the programs that you're insisting are necessary and say, do we really need these, or can we start killing? It doesn't come from who sets the rate. It comes from the people who are receiving the benefit of those funds. And without an honest discussion on where we want education to be as a priority, and then an honest discussion of what we want our labor practices to be, and that's one of the things I've said is I would like to bring all of the labor negotiations to the executive office, municipal, all the way through the state, to say, let's bring a wage freeze in across the board. Let's take the pounding at that level instead of having 169 towns and all the state agencies individually fight over things. And the reason I think it needs to be in the executive office is because the executive has the bully pulpit. And it is a resonating message to say, I'm asking our state employees not to give back anything, but to ask for no more. The same thing that most people would agree to in their own lives. I know as a small business owner, I would love to make what I was making in 2008. I don't. If we put that demand on every employee in the state and do it from the executive office where there is political pressure and social pressure to acquiesce to that very basic demand, I think if we start there, we can see some significant change.
As you're aware, the governor instituted the process of putting together a biennial budget as she's mandated for the transfer to the next administration. I'm already receiving emails from many of the nonprofits out here in Eastern Connecticut who received a letter from the Department of Social Services or whatever state agency. Basically, the letter says, tell us what you can live without because we have to cut things by 15%.
Right.
That's having a very chilling effect. They see Target being painted on their backs again. Where do you stand on the issue of nonprofits who are employers, contributors to local economies, and quite frankly do a far better job at serving the needs of needy people than any state agency does at a cheaper price?
I agree with all of that, and it goes back to a comment I made earlier that the practice in the past has been an across-the-board cut. So we're asking everyone to give up 15%. What I'm saying is, let's start looking at who provides the best value. When it comes to these agencies, they all have noble causes, their hearts are in the right place, and really most of, if not all, do a more cost-effective job than the state handling the same process. But that doesn't mean everybody does it well. So instead of asking for across-the-board 15% cuts, I want to find out who's giving us our best value for the dollar, and maybe we reduce the number of agencies by 15 or 20 or 25%. Is that going to unemploy people? I'm not sure. It's going to unemploy some, but if we're expanding the scope for those remaining that are doing a better job, some of that employment is going to fall back in. But I don't accept the notion that because somebody is being paid directly or indirectly through state funds, that if they're not meeting the objectives in an effective manner, that they're owed a job. We're not going to be able to cut our spending and have no casualties. There's going to be casualties, but somebody's got to be willing to take that message out, and I'm willing to do that. So some will have targets on their back, but those who are doing a good job, the target's going to be much smaller.
As a municipal leader, you've struggled with putting together the municipal budget. You know how difficult that can be. Can you actually accomplish all that you think you can accomplish within that 30-day period to present that budget to the legislature? Again, to deal with this $3.5 billion hole that needs to get filled within 6 months?
I think a very competent budget that provides the structure and the objectives, the priorities can be done within 30 days. What I haven't seen done for quite some time is to have forceful leadership saying, I'm an elected, this is why I'm here, I have the will of the people behind me, and I suggest we start having an honest debate on how we get to this point. I'm not saying in 30 days we're going to have a budget that's going to get voted and passed on and everyone's going to say great, but there's going to be a direction that's going to be obvious from it.
But you also mentioned that, one of the things that could be done was, not appoint all the commissioners and some of those appointed people. As the new governor coming on in, if you opt not to appoint a commissioner here and a commissioner there, how then do you expect to get that meaningful feedback to make the kind of decisions that you want to make if you don't have one of your team over there giving you the honest answer?
Well, a very big team exists right now. I think we can pare that back and have a competent team that's based more on abilities. And it's not that everybody's going to go, but certainly not everyone's going to stay. And one of the advantages I bring is there's not a lot of patronage that's trailing behind me. I'm not a Democrat that has 18 years worth of pent-up demand waiting for the Democratic administration to get in there and fill some slots. And Tom Foley can say he's an outsider, but you don't raise money for the president. You don't get ambassadorship appointments by being an outsider. You get it by being an insider. And I think he's going to bring people that I'm not going to say are the wrong people or don't have the best intentions, but I think I'm going to be in a better position to go out and attract people purely on their abilities. There's going to be fewer of them, and it is going to be difficult, but it's only going to take a handful of key people to start pushing things in the right direction.
In your town, do you utilize generally accepted accounting practices?
We do.
So in turn, would you bring that to the state government?
I would bring that to the state government with the understanding that things are so messed up now, it's not practical to think you could bring it into